Walking simulators and other similar artsy style games are not normally my type of jam, if you couldn't tell from the kind of videos I usually make. Games like Dear Esther have never really tickled my fancy, but I don't think that the genre is completely valueless. I've enjoyed games like The Stanley Parable, The Beginner's Guide, and I've even had a good time with mods like The Warrior of Newport for Crysis. So when I saw A Wolf in Autumn on Steam for just $1.19, I thought I should probably give it a look and see what it's all about. To my surprise, the game was less of a walking simulator and more of a first-person point-and-click adventure, where the player has to solve a number of puzzles in order to complete the story. The puzzles were really quite simplistic, and boiled down basically to use scissors on rope. In fact, the most complex puzzle simply involved unlocking a door by interacting with a pipeline that was fairly straightforward. The hardest part about these puzzles wasn't the puzzles themselves, but was rather the way the game handles interactive objects. There's no inventory, so the only way to use an object is to hold it in your hands. While this might not seem like too much of a problem initially, it can cause a number of issues as you progress. As by the time you're done, say, unlocking a door, you have to just chuck the item away casually. And then once you're halfway through the game, you'll be spending most of your time just scouring the area to see where you left that damn pair of scissors. At one point, I actually was stumbling around for several minutes after I had lost a flashlight which blended into a texture on the ground. Seriously, the amount of items that were reused to solve puzzles had me constantly thinking if we just had an inventory, this might actually work far better. Traditional point-and-click games and other games such as even Amnesia use an inventory system, which means that you can keep the items that you need on hand fairly easily. Speaking of the time that was taken to do things, the game advertises itself as having a running time of 1 hour, but I managed to finish it in just under 40 minutes. The actual game time would have been even less if the game hadn't crashed on me halfway through and forced me to restart. The game doesn't have any saving, so that's my only option there. Now, I'm not usually a stickler for game length, but I feel that the game could have lasted a bit longer. But despite this, the amount of content that was on offer for the price is reasonable. The game's developer, David Szymanski, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, has done an excellent job creating the atmosphere, and this is what carries the game in my opinion. While the individual art assets might not be very high quality, the clever use of sound and lighting managed to create both a horror and surreal atmosphere. The game has two major environments, an outdoor forest and a basement, and they both managed to convey the atmosphere that David seems to have wanted them to. On the Steam store page, David states that all the assets were made from scratch, and this shows. The overall fidelity of the environment and objects look very Unity, and are admittedly low quality, but I prefer them over anything prefab from the Unity store. Considering Unity is basically free to use, almost every man in their, wolf have the ability to use it, and a lot of them just reuse some of the items that can be bought in the store. However, David's avoided this, and I think that's pretty good. The game also features some pretty good voice acting by Julie Hooverson, and her lines come off fairly well. However, at some points, the distortion that was used on her voice to make it scary or eerie actually was quite funny, mostly due to just the stereotypical nature of it, and the fact that the effects weren't the best. So I feel that drew away from the atmosphere at some points.
You're disobeying your mother, Autumn. Disobedient girls get punished.
And the trees have many eyes.
They see everything. They judge everything.
And the wolves know too.
And I know. Don't touch that machine. Stop getting into things. Don't try my patience.
The overall plot of the game, whilst not being anything completely out there, is an interesting one. Not to give away too much, the game centers around the young girl who the player controls. The game attempts to clue the player into the girl's potential past through item descriptions and other events that happen. The setting's fairly unique, and it's worth checking out. However, some of the presentation of the story feels extremely inefficient. As soon as the game starts up, the player is presented with a huge wall of text that, in my opinion, could have either been completely omitted or presented in a more natural way through the game world. At one point we find a note, so there's no reason why we couldn't have little notes scattered throughout the world, or even have it just presented through more item descriptions or something like that. I don't think that these huge wall of text needed to be there, and they even showed up later in the game towards the end. At one point, there was even text that did not match up with the voice acting that I was expected to read while listening to the voice acting. I don't know if this was intentional, but it really took away from the experience. While I was playing this game, I also constantly questioned why the game was first person at all, and the gameplay and story focus seemed to be far more suited to a 2D point and click than a first person game. I feel a lot of the issues with the items and the puzzles could be resolved this way too, as it would be much harder to lose track of items or overlook important puzzle pieces. 2D side-scrollers are also really good at telling story above gameplay, so I don't see why they couldn't have done this. There's plenty of horror and more spooky point-and-clicks out there, so I think that they could have really worked this way. The 2D environments could also portray the same atmosphere that the game manages to do surprisingly well. Overall, I think that David has managed to create a fairly interesting game here that touches on some concepts and ideas that are not usually investigated in the medium. Despite all its flaws, the game still has something going for it, and it's better than I was expecting from a cheap indie game on Steam. I'd recommend checking it out, but only if you're willing to spend the $1.20 on something that has quite a few flaws. If this was a mod for another game or released freely, I feel I would absolutely recommend it, but the extremely short running time of the product, combined with the jankiness, makes it hard to justify the price, even if it is less than a packet of chips. While it's a very interesting game, I've seen a number of other projects that ellipse the scope and scale of this game be released as mods, such as the original Stanley Parable or the Warrior of Newport for Crysis. So I think that this purchase makes it just that more difficult. However, if you do have $1.20 left over from selling your Steam trading cards, I'd say give it a go. It's not the best thing on the planet, but it's definitely interesting.